Okay.
I started thinking about how all the things in our life add up to who we are and where we are. And I started thinking about God's plan for us and how He works things together in ways that we would not imagine or even understand. And so I wanted to talk about that today, and to do that I'm going to use the book of Esther. So you can turn to the book of Esther back in the Old Testament, and first I'll give you just a little bit about it, and then we'll go through this story. And if you think that your life has had some ups and downs and weird turns and things like that, Esther's got you beat. And her name was originally, in Hebrew, Hadassah, which means myrtle. So, I don't know, I think she's pretty unlucky. I don't think any one of those three names is very pretty. You know? Of course, I can't really have much to say since my first name is James, so it's like, yeah, okay. We'll start with verse 1, and we'll read that, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. Now in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. Now, you're not going to find that name when you go looking in the history books. That's not the name that history knows this gentleman by. Now, I guess because I'm ignorant, I always thought that his name that was used was Xerxes. Xerxes. But it is actually supposed to be pronounced Xerxes. So, I was this many years old when I discovered that. And this is the gentleman, which is why I think I'm not the only one that ever mispronounced his name, who launched the Persian invasion of Greece. You may have heard of that. You may have heard of the 300 Spartans who tried to stop him at Thermopylae. You may have heard that his being stopped by a tyrant dictator king allowed democracy, gave him the time for Athens to defeat him, and kept the seed of democracy alive for all of us. So he's probably a pretty famous character. And if you're old like I am, you remember not the movie 300, but you remember the movie 300 Spartans. And all of the different armies that he had. He only had 30,000 warriors there when they attacked at Thermopylae. Yeah, that's a bunch. And from all over. So, this is the one who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. At the time, he is basically the king of the world. He is the most powerful man in the entire world. But power can cause you grief. Now, I'll give you a little bit of history. The Jews had already been carried away and were scattered throughout his kingdom. Now, I'm going to tell you a little strange fact about this. This is the only book in the Old or New Testament that does not mention the name of God. Not once. Doesn't use Lord or any of the other things. That does not mean that God's footprints are not all over this book. But it's, I think, a really good way to show us that you don't have to have a worship at the Church of Christ sticker on your bumper. That your godly life will set you aside. It's not what comes out of your mouth, it's the way you live. Let us turn to, we'll get there again to get the full context, but turn to the 4th chapter of Esther, verse 14. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Well, he's a Jew, and we see that he got in trouble for being a Jew, and that the part about the Jews was they had their own law, they were different. So we can see that God's footprints are all over this. The faith that Mordecai had here shows a true faith in God is not necessarily waving the I'm a Christian banner and all of that. It's living faithfully and having faith. He had faith. He said, we're going to get through this. As we get into this story, we'll find out just how bad a fix it is. But he had absolute faith that they would get through. But I want you to think about the sentiment that he told Esther, who was his adopted daughter. She was the daughter of his uncle. Who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? I think that's a message that needs to be on everybody's mirror. And it's on my wife's. So every day when she gets dressed, she can see that whatever comes in that day, good, bad, indifferent, you never know if that's not the time and the place that God created you for. You do not know that may not be the very reason for your existence. Something could happen that day that is part of God's great plan. Not just for you, but for other people. And I think that's a great thought to keep with us at all times, that we never know. Your simple act of faith, what it can do. As we go through this story, we find that Ahasuerus was having a big feast. There was one of three. He was having a great, great feast. And you read about all of it there, and we don't have time to go through all of that. And his wife, the queen, was having a feast for the women. You have to remember, this is the greatest king on the face of the earth. And he was unbelievably powerful and wealthy and knew it. So, well, we read verse 10. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Bezatha, Harbonah, Bigtha, Agbatha, Zethar, and Carcas, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of the king Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. Most scholars believe that the crown was to be her only clothing when she came. And she said, nope. I think she figured, he's drunk. He'll forget about it tomorrow. Because drunks tend to do that. But one of the biggest problems that men have, and I know that all you women know it, is our pride and our ego. Yes, women can be proud too, but we got you beat. We do have problems with our ego and our pride, and his pride was hurt. And he got mad. Now, most of us have been mad and done something stupid. Right? Most of us have said things we didn't mean, but we have a blessing that the most powerful man in the world didn't have. We can change our mind. But the king of Persia did not have that permission. Verse 19, if it please the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. He was mad, and one of the best things you can do if you ever come into a position of power, if you have employees, get people around you who will keep you from doing stupid things. Almost every person who has had power, who has really messed up, who's lost their business, who's gotten their country in a big jam, has been because they had people in their cabinet that did not look out for them. And here's King Ahasuerus most powerful man in the world, and his people aren't looking out for him. They're going, okay, yeah, we'll show her. We'll show her who's boss. So if we go down now to chapter 2, we see, after these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. See, now this is the funny part here. Now he's no longer mad at her. He was mad. Now he's not. But now he figures out that he's got a problem. He doesn't have a queen. How is that going to look to all of his people? He doesn't have a queen. Oh, he's got hundreds of concubines, but he doesn't have a queen. He has nobody to stand beside him. He realizes that instead of making him look powerful, his actions made him look weak. Then the king's young men who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king." Let's have a beauty pageant. Let's bring them all in, and we'll get the most beautiful, wonderful woman. Now, I'm sure that like Cinderella's ugly stepsisters, there were many, many young women who were going, pick me, let me be the one. And I want the crown. I want the jewels. And I don't care if he's anything. He's just a means to an end. But Esther is a good Jewish young woman. She's faithful. She doesn't really want to be the queen of Persia. That wasn't on her bucket list. And you go, well, how do you know that, Les? Well, when you look at the time when she came in and the time when the story starts, there's 4 years difference. Now, well, I know he didn't wait a year before he stopped being mad and started looking for another one. That probably didn't happen too long. So, Esther was one of those that was taken. Now the thing is they would be a year getting ready for him. So they'd be the prettiest, and so that any children would certainly be the king's. And they would go before him, and if he wanted, he might call him back a couple times, but they went in once, and until he called them back, they went forever to the palace for the wives and the concubines. They went into the harem, and they stayed there. Well, in verse 9 it says, and the young woman, that is Esther, pleased him, that's Haggai, the eunuch in charge, and won his favor. And he quickly provided her with cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. But she doesn't go before the king for 4 years. If she had wanted to be the queen of Persia, and the head eunuch who's in charge of all this, she would have been first. She would have gone right in there. But she found favor with the head guy, and it took 4 years for it to come her turn. She didn't want her turn. That wasn't her goal. Can you imagine how crushed she must have felt? A young Jewish woman, ready with her whole life ahead of her, and now, if she gets to be queen, well, that's okay. But if she doesn't, she goes to be with all the other concubines and has to be alone the rest of her life. Away from her family, her friends, all of it. What a terrible thing. But God saw that she had favor with Haggai, and so she got to put it off as long as possible. Verse 15, when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, that's why we know the 4 years, you see. Go back to the beginning. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Well, it's probably the best possible outcome, but it's not what she wants. Now, she had not let anybody know that she was a Jew. Now, her adopted father, Mordecai, was a fairly important man because he sat at the gate. That's where the important people sat. Well, in verse 21 it says, in those days as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands over the leadership. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. And they were hanged. Now that's important for later. Now as we go into this story, Mordecai, being a good Jew, didn't bow to people Haman was advanced above everybody else in the kingdom, and he got upset that Mordecai didn't give him the honor that he thought was due. And it says that he didn't want to just punish Mordecai, he wanted to punish all of his. So they started casting lots, trying to find the best time to do this. So he goes before the king and says, hey, I'll give you 10,000 crowns. Because there's a people out there. And they don't follow your laws. They're strange. They're different. Remember what I said? They were different. They were Jews. They were acting the way they were supposed to. And the king says, fine. I trust you. You know. If you think these are bad people, that's okay. So the king makes a proclamation. On a certain day, it's okay to go kill the Jews and take the property. But that's not enough for Haman. He knows the king likes him. So he has a big gallows built near his house so he can hang Mordecai. Well, Mordecai, when we were at the verse that we talked about that showed God's presence there, that was because Mordecai had been in sackcloth and ashes out in front of the palace. Esther's son sends out clothes. No, can't do it. Well, why? And he sends the decree that Xerxes had made. And says, you need to go to the king. And you need to tell him. And that's when all of this came about. And her answer to him was, all the king's, this is verse 11 of chapter 4. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there's but one law, to be put to death, except the one whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. They told Mordecai what Esther had said. And that's when he makes his speech. He says, tell her this. And so she says, well, okay. I'll fast and pray, and you have all the people fast. It doesn't say pray, but when fasting was done by Jews, it was always a time of prayer. This is what's going on. Well, God works in ways that maybe we don't always understand. Esther's going to have a big feast and invites Haman. Wants to get everything ready. Because that's what she asked, can I have a big feast? She's planning. Well, the night before, I guess King Ahasuerus couldn't sleep. So he said, bring me the book of all the good deeds the people have done. You know, I'm sure that probably put him to sleep, you know. But as he's reading that, he comes across the name of Mordecai. And now Mordecai had saved his life. That happened before. He'd forgotten all about it. And he goes, well, what was done to honor this man? Nothing. Oh, well. And he proceeds to do some great things, and that upsets Haman even more. But it ends with Queen Esther explaining what happened and explaining basically that Haman wants to kill her and all of her people and a man who saved the king's life. Well, the king, not being stupid, has a brilliant flash. Haman is not on my side. Well, Haman is hung on his own gallows, and he can't take back his order. Remember? So he says, on that day, let all the Jews be armed, and let them take, basically they can go out and get who they want, who they think is one to take their stuff. And so it all works out. Now, as you hear that story, you've got to be thinking, how is this going to work out? What's going to happen? But it does. Because God has his hand in this world. A verse that we all know is in Romans 8:28. And God works all things for the good of those who love him. The good, the bad, the indifferent. They're all strands that God weaves. And you go, well, you know, not everybody loves God, and so he doesn't necessarily love them, but they're affected by the people who love God. Those strands in their lives are woven. And like I've said before, I'm going to give you two illustrations because I think they're absolutely important. If you take the most beautiful tapestry in the world and you turn it over, it's a bunch of weird threads and knots and looks ugly. From our side, our life is that tapestry. But when we get to heaven and look back, we'll see the real side of the tapestry and see the beautiful picture that God has woven with our lives, the lives of the people around us, and millions of people that we don't even know who had to each one do exactly what they were supposed to do for our lives to turn out the way that they did. And the other is the story of the old Chinese gentleman. His son went out and caught a beautiful wild stallion. And all the people said, "Oh, how wonderful!" And he said, "How do you know?" While trying to break that stallion, his son got thrown off and broke his leg. And the people came and said, "Oh, how awful!" And he once again said, "How do you know?" A few days later, the emperor's men came to grab up people for the army. His son has a broken leg. He doesn't have to go. And all the people said, how wonderful. And he said, how do you know? Down here in this life, you will not necessarily know it's good that has happened in your life and what is bad that has happened in your life. Because that which seems to be bad might be the best thing that's ever happened to you. We don't know. It's like the Kenny Rogers song. Never count your money while you're sitting at the table. There's time enough for counting, and the dealing's done. You count your fortune in heaven. You don't count it down here. If anybody needs to answer the invitation, public way, you can come now as we stand and as we sing.